What's up, y'all? This is Black Light. What's up, friends? Well, I told y'all that I would be doing a story on the origin of policing, which is slave patrol. And I want to try to make some comparisons of the history of the slave patrol and show how it's the origin of policing and show that this is the reason why that we have the relationship that blacks have the relationship that they have with police because it's actually pretty much all by design. Like when the police are okay, well, first of all, I want to ask y'all, do y'all recognize? Look at what y'all looking at on the screen, those photos right there. Because the first time that I seen this, it just actually kind of like blew my mind when I seen that. Because those are sheriff badges, right? Those are police badges. You might see that. Um, you're going to see that on any state trooper, local police officer. Um, if it's a FBI, not in uniform, they're gonna have to flash you a badge, which similar to that. But if you look closely to the one in the silver, this is the original badge. This is where we get the one that is from Los Angeles. This would be like the original one, which as we see on this one, on the original one, it says Runaway Slave Patrol. On the more modern one today, it just says Los Angeles County on it. And then look at these, look at all these badges right here. Runaway Slave Patrol, Plantation Police. Plantation Police, y'all. Mind you, these are actual real badges that were worn. These aren't just like made up. These are like the real legit things. You can go look them up for yourself. These are the actual badges. So you see the resemblance and the correlation between the badges of slave patrol and the badges that the officers wear today. This is where they got the idea of the badges from, straight out of slave patrol. But right now I'm gonna do a little reading. Y'all gotta bear with me a little bit because, like I said, I haven't really been too big on doing PowerPoint slides presentations, but I want to still get this information out um, the best way I can. Okay. According to historian Gary Potter, who is also part of wrote the history of policing in the United States, EKU School of Justice Studies. And according to the historian Gary Potter, slave patrol served three main functions. One, to chase down, apprehend, and return to their owners runaway slaves. So we know one purpose that they had was to chase down, apprehend, and return slaves to their owners, or where they more up to date, where they're supposed to be, or where police think that they're supposed to be. And I want you to not really differentiate slave patrol between blacks in America for the simple fact you could simply replace the word slave patrol with black patrol just for the simple fact that the slaves were black. There weren't white white slaves in the sense of slaveries that the Africans went through when they were brought over here into this country. So you can replace the word slave patrol with black patrol because that's who they talking about when they refer to slave. That bad say slave, we everybody knew who they was talking about. Two, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slaves revolts. To maintain a form of discipline for slave workers who were subject to summary justice outside the law. And this is the actual oath that they were taking. This is the format. This is actually the one from North Carolina and around the other places. they had similar pledges. I do swear that I will, as a searcher for guns, swords, and other weapons among the slaves or among the blacks in my district, faithfully and as privately as I can, discharge the trust reposed in me as the law directs to the best of my power, so help me God. Now, this was an oath that was taken. That you know how they take an oath nowadays? When you become officer, you take an oath, and that's what you're saying, that when you take this position, that these are the things that you're going to do. And the slave patrol or the black patrol were made to swear that I will, as searcher for guns, swords, and other weapons among the blacks in my district, faithfully and as privately as I can. And we still see that very same act going on today. The police can stop you for a misdemeanor traffic stop. They want you to, something that you just simply supposed to get a simple ticket for, not, putting on a turn signal, not doing a complete stop. Something that the average American citizen would just get either a warning or a citation for. But when it comes to blacks in this country, they want you to get out the car. Then when you get out the car, then they want to put you in handcuffs. Then they want to violate your rights because they have no right to search your property. Then you say, no, I don't want to allow you to search my property. Then they go on your property anyway. They search you over a misdemeanor traffic stop. You will get searched for guns, swords, and weapons, and nowadays even drugs. They'll try to make it seem like you have drugs on you or that they're looking for drugs. So I just want to point that out. Like that's still going. Now this right here. Okay, let me go ahead and read a little bit more. Okay, and this is still according to Gary Potter. Organized policing was one of the many types of social controls imposed on enslaved African Americans in the South. Physical and psychological violence took many forms, including an overseer's brutal whip, the intentional breakup of families, deprivation of food and other necessities, and the private employment of slave catchers to track down runaways. Slave patrols were no less violent in their control of African Americans. They beat and terrorized as well. And see, this is where I'm going with this, is that this is what police were actually created to do. And so we want to wonder why, like why there's so much injustice, why there's so much police brutality against blacks. That's the purpose of me bringing this to your attention. The reason why it's like that is because that's what they were set up to do. And then we always wonder why, when police officers are taking the court or before judges or whatnot, that they simply easily get off. Nine times out of ten, unless it's just something just like there's no way their hands are tied and they have to do something about it because it would be most likely like a uprising or something like that, then they do something about it. But this is one of the reasons why they have what we call qualified immunity for officers. That's one of the purposes of qualified immunity, is to protect them when they are doing these beatings, when they're doing these searches, etc. Because qualified immunity is where police officers or slave patrol cannot be held accountable or charged criminally for things that they did. For example, what happened with Breonna Taylor, what happened when anytime they shoot somebody and they claim, I fear for my life, or it was an accident, or anything like that, qualified immunity covers them under that. Slave patrols were no less violent in their controls of African Americans. They beat and terrorized as well. Their distinction was that they were legally. See, now here we go. Now, this is really the transition and the difference between slave patrol and the slave patrol of today is their distinction was that they were legally compelled to do so by local authorities. So in this time, they were actually compelled to beat and to terrorize black people. The only difference now is after everything happened with the abolition of slavery, they took that out. So it's no longer on paper, but it's still in the culture, it's still in the spirit, it's still in the origin of policing. A piece of paper doesn't change that. And we haven't seen any movement since they switched over from calling it slave patrol to police that would have changed anything, that would have changed the culture, the mindset, the training, anything. In fact, the trainings are actually enhanced, and the actions that are supposed to be somehow outdated or not done any longer, it's mighty funny that when officers act just like the slave patrol, that there's 9 times out of 10, there's no repercussions because they're doing, what they were created to do. Um, See, and then it even goes on to say, here, the historian Gary goes on to say it was considered a civic duty, one that in some areas could result in a fine if avoided. And this piece of paper that I got on here right now is kind of in some paperwork to where if officers or the slave patrols did not uphold what they're supposed to do as far as beating and terrorizing the slaves, um, they could be fined, and that's what he's saying here. And so let me just give you a little understanding on because it kind of sounded dry when just say beat and terrorize because we don't really want to believe that these people were actually created for that. And one of the reasons for that was the fact that whites were starting to become outnumbered, and so they had to put together something in order to protect themselves or police blacks. And so that in order to keep them from doing uprisings or trying to attack them, they wanted to intimidate them and instill fear in them. And so that was the purpose of beating and terrorizing blacks. Okay, so then it says, okay, yeah, they will receive financial compensation for their work typically. And then we see that all the time. And I'm just really trying to make comparisons. You can take it for what you want. But when these police officers go out here and beat up these people, what do they get? They get a paid vacation. They get to go sit at home with pay. They get these big things where people donate thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. What's the name? I can't even think of the name of that thing. That thing. But compensation for their work. Typically, slave patrol routines included enforcing curfews, checking travelers for a permission pass. And what I want to say with that checking travelers with permission pass, it's the same thing that when you minding your own business, you haven't committed any violation of the law, and then all of a sudden you look suspicious, and now they want to come up to you and want you to identify yourself and pull out your ID, pull out your license, pull out paperwork showing who you are. And that's supposed to be against your constitutional right. If you're not violating any laws, or if the police hasn't caught you engaged in any criminal activity, you are not obligated to give them your ID. Go and watch video after video after video where people are taken to jail, harassed, beat up over not giving up their ID. Why is that? Why is that? If it's the law and you're a police officer and you know that it's the law that it's their constitutional right that they don't have to give you an ID, it's in police policy that citizens do not have to give up their ID unless they're caught involved in criminal activity. So you can't walk up to somebody because they look suspicious and then supposedly this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that what they say is one thing, but what they're doing is something else. They're carrying out the same culture and activities that the slave patrol did before they switched over to policing. Now, on paper, it's saying one thing, but as the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Now, many of you sitting right there with me right now, you know how you would feel uncomfortable, especially if you're a black person and you mind your own business. And then the police walks up to you and says, "Give me your ID. You look suspicious," or "What are you doing over here in this area? Why are you over here? What are you doing over here? Where are you going?" Mind your own business, because that's what they were created to do. And nothing has happened to change that. Nothing in policing, nothing, no foundational revolution or nothing's happened to uplift the roots of where the origin of it is. They're doing the exact same thing that they always have been doing because that's what they were created to do. The only thing different is that paper says something different. Typically, slave patrol route, and I'm still reading from this article by Gary, the historian of out of the book or the article, "The History of Policing in the United States," EKU school, and he's out of the School of Justice Studies. So he goes on to say, checking travelers for a permission pass, catching those assembling without permission, and preventing any form of organized resistance. Okay. And so you notice that it said to and let me point out something to y'all. You notice that we always ask the question, why are none of these mass shooters when they're taken in? Now these are actually people who just actually killed people, right? Killed multiple people. We know that they have a lethal weapon on them, and we know clearly that they're not afraid to use it. But when the police encounters these people, we see it over and over and over and over again, taken in not with a scratch on them. And we ask, why does that happen? Taken in with a scratch. And then you'll turn on the news, you'll turn on, and all these black people shot and killed over misdemeanor, literally over misdemeanor traffic stops. It's not like let's think about it. It's not like these people, it's a traffic stop. You didn't do a complete stop. You didn't whatever, you swayed across the lane, whatever the traffic violation is, right? Okay, regular citizens. So imagine you're a regular citizen, you don't do a complete stop, the police stops you, right? How does that escalate into you getting beat up or you dead? And then it's always you tried to reach for their gun, you tried to reach for your taser. Mind you, see, we got to use common sense. Like a lot of times when we hear these stories, we don't even think or critical think about what's being told to us. We just take it and run with it. Like, why would a normal citizen being stopped over for a misdemeanor traffic violation then attempts, don't even want to get out their car or vehicle in the first place, then doing so because they're being told to, right? Trying to comply. Then you get out. Then the next thing you know, you will hear officer yelling, "Don't go for my taser. Don't go for my gun." Now, we're not talking about people that the police has countered like they're these vicious felonies, like somebody who just robbed a bank or some big time, cartel dope dealer or something like that. Somebody that's feeling like they're going to be going away for years or something, or may get the death penalty or something like that. So why do we see so many times in so many of these videos, police officers over a traffic misdemeanor stop yelling, "Don't take my gun, don't go for my taser"? Like I don't get that. Like make it make sense. Like we talking about people over a traffic misdemeanor stop, and then you want to act like the people trying to go from a traffic misdemeanor stop to felony killing a police officer. Like it just don't make no sense to me. But that's the reason why that happens is because that's what they're supposed to do. That's why. And then you got the mass shooters, no scratch on them because they can follow the law for that one. The big school shooting where the police did not go inside of the school to rescue the student because that's not slave patrol's job. I just listed to you what slaves patrol job is to do. One is to chase down, apprehend, and return slaves, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave results, and to maintain a form of discipline for slave workers who were subject to the summary justice outside of the law. So that's why when we see these different things like that, that's why they go so hard on us and then so lenient on those. Because you're not going to tell me that somebody who just actually killed people with a assault rifle is less dangerous than an unarmed black person involved in a traffic stop. So why is that? Why are blacks in a misdemeanor traffic stop treated like they're someone who just killed five to 10 people and actually has a assault rifle? That's why. Okay, as okay. So now we have Sally Hayden writes in her book Slaves Patrol, Law and Violence in Virginia and the Carolinas. She's also with the Harvard University Press. And then she just goes on to say the history of police work in the South grows out of this early fascination by white patrollers with what African American slaves were doing. And we see that, that's what I'm saying. We see the exact same thing today. You can't be minding your own business and they don't want to wonder what you're doing, where you going, where you been. Most law enforcement was a definition of white patrolmen watching, catching, or beating black slaves. So this is the history. Now listen to what she's saying. The history of police work in the South grows out of this early fascination by white patrollers with what African American slaves were doing. Most law enforcement was, by definition, the actual definition of law enforcement was white patrolmen watching, catching, or beating black slaves. Now, that was the very definition of law enforcement. And that's what we see going on: watching, catching, and beating. And then I'm going to tell you something else too. A lot of the reasons, a lot of the reasons, like we see this at the protest, one of the things to do is to maintain a form of discipline, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolts, or you could say black revolts, black riots, or not even as protests, anything that would uprise against what they got going on or what they wanted to do. So that's why we see at these protests, that's what they're doing. They're doing their job. You had a protest, like for instance, bring it up, January 6th, right? January 6th. This is a federal building. We're in the middle of a federal proceeding. Got to do with the presidency. The highest rankings official in the entire world, pretty much, are in this building. And y'all seen, I don't even have to go into it. Y'all seen how they did on January 6th. How many people on January 6th got beat up? How many people at January 6th actually got arrested? And January 6th ain't even the only ones. When they I can't think of the one lady they tried to kidnap her, did the same thing at the Capitol. I can't remember the story. But what I'm saying is, how is it something so terrible like that on January 6th No one's beat up. No one's locked up. They start locking people up after the fact, like after the main thing had taken place and they called in. Then they start arresting people. But I'm talking about these people were spraying chemicals on them, fighting them, getting physical with them. No one felt the need to shoot anyone. No one, and I know we heard this all, but I'm saying this again for a point. Why? Because we want to ask why. Why didn't it happen? Because that's not what their job to do. And then we went turned right back around and then said, okay, had this been a Black Lives Matter protest, had this been any type of black movement, not just Black Lives Matter, because we've always had protests and etc. before Black Lives Matter, but that's one of the most recent movements, and I'm not referring to the organization. I'm talking about the movement. But we seen the reaction with those protests. And not all of them was riots. Yeah, some people did riot, but even with the regular protests, I went to one, so I know. And then you you wonder why. Why something like January 6th could happen, no one shot, no one beat up, nothing like that. Police officers, some of the Slave Patrol or police officers were actually taking pictures with some of the people that came into there by force and through violence. So make that make sense. So, and this is another thing too. We wonder why we have so many Karens and these Kens. Do you know that there was a time that there were so many blacks and they were getting so overly populated that they would allow regular, just you didn't even necessarily have to be a part of the slave patrol. It got to the point to where just regular white citizens could chastise you or they could become the police over you. They could then tell you um, what you could do, question you, try to figure out what you doing, what you got going on. That's the reason why, because that is also that's ingrained in there that they have the ability to police as well, and that's why they feel so comfortable when you're doing something that's not even necessarily illegal. If it's just something that they don't like, they'll call the police on you because they feel like they have the authority. They've been given the authority, and like I said, not on paper, but just in the culture of it all, that they can tell you what to do, or that they're supposed to be policing to make sure that you're not doing something wrong, or to interrogate you to make sure that you're not doing something wrong. Okay, Harvard University Press, she goes on to say, hey, Haddon, first formed in 1704 in South Carolina, patrols last over 150 years. Hayden argues there are distinct parallels between the legal slaves patrol before the war and extra legal terrorism tactics used by the vigilante groups during Reconstruction, most notoriously the Ku Klux Klan. So after, when they wanted to act like it was over with, slave patrol was over with, then she said the emergence of the most notoriously the Ku Klux Klan, a hidden extension of the police department. So Sally E. Slave Patrol, she wrote the book Law and Violence in Virginia and Carolina, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press compared the Slave Patrol to the Ku Klux Klan. Here's another piece of documentation. It says This is a list of rules. Slaves residing in the country whom owners, masters, or mistresses. Okay, I just want to read the third rule over here. You can read um, the rest of it. But if any slave or any black shall violate, and the reason why I'm saying black is because you can recognize that when they're referring to a slave, that they're absolutely 100% unequivocally referring to a black person. Like, I don't want us to get confused with the terminology because it's saying slave. Like, well, I ain't no slave. Yeah, you're not a slave, but so don't get caught up in that. Well, I ain't no slave, because what I'm doing is pointing out how police today are still the slave patrol, but they just dropped the slave and put police on there. But if any slave shall violate the foregoing rules, the patrol shall have power, and it shall be their duty, any two of their number being present, to whip the said slave, either at the time of the offense being committed or at any time within 3 months thereafter. The number of stripes not to exceed 15, unless the said slave shall be guilty of insolent behavior or make his escape from the patrol, in either which cases the number of stripes shall not exceed 39. Then we wonder why we see we wonder why we see blacks getting beat up by the police when they think that you did something wrong, when they think that you look suspicious, when you try to stand up for your right. It's what the whole entire organization, the whole thing, that's what it was created to do. It was created to control blacks, intimidate blacks, scare them, to put fear into them. And how did they do that? By beating, by interrogating, being hostile, being violent, making examples out of people. If you do this, if you say that, then we'll do this to you. And I already told you, in some of the states, if you did not beat, then you weren't doing your job. And just like I just told you in the report, they actually considered law enforcement was the beating and intimidating of black people. That was the actual like definition of being law enforcement. And then this is just a clip, y'all. Like I said, I was trying to get my PowerPoints. I had this one to show like how it said they do it to control, to watch, and to search. That's why we have that. One of the first things they want to do, they don't give a damn what they stopping you for. They could be stopping you because you got an air freshener in your car, but they still want to search your vehicle and make you get out and look and interrogate you like you did something so terrible, and all you did is a misdemeanor traffic violation. How many times do we see that? We still seeing the exact same tactics because nothing's changed. It's still the slave patrol. Police today are the slave patrol. Nothing's changed except for things on paper. That's the only thing that has changed. And see, that's why we got people that do like they did with like Ahmaud Arbery. You felt compelled to jump in your vehicles and track this man down because you thought that he was breaking into somebody's house. Just like we see with Zimmerman. It's just crazy. Like it's really hasn't changed. We still got the slave patrol right here to this day. Then the history of racialized policing, like many scholars, Khalid Gibran Muhammad, professor of history, race, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, traces the history of policing in America to slave patrols. Now he's this is another. I tried to put some scholarly sources in here to back up what I'm saying. You know, just to tie everything together, so it's just not y'all taking my word for it. Because I could just really just freestyle and talk, but the purpose of this PowerPoint presentation is to actual give you some scholarly sources to back up what I'm saying. So it's just not me just just talking. Sometimes I just freelance talk, and other times I want to provide scholarly sources, and I felt like this was important enough to provide scholarly sources for, like really, so trace the history of policing in America to slave patrols in the antebellum South, in which white citizens were expected to help supervise the movements of enslaved black people. This legacy, he believes, can still be seen in policing today. The surveillance, the deputization, essentially of all white men to the police officers, or in this case, slave patrollers, and then to dispense corporal punishment on the scene are all backed, baked in from the very beginning, he told NPR last year. Known as the Black Codes, the various rules limited to the kinds of job African Americans could hold, their rights to buy own property, and even their movement. So, I mean, that's where it comes from, y'all. So, I'm hoping that y'all getting um, because when I read this, like I always question, I'm like, well, why did they do that? Why did they get away with that? Why did they treat blacks like that? Why, you can see a white person doing something the exact same thing or something similar like that, and or worse than that, like I compare with the mass shooters. Not, I haven't seen a mass shooter yet. Even I think the worst one I seen was this guy. He actually shot a police officer, and I think they roughed him up. But they roughed him up, but he actually shot a police officer. But these mass shooters that actually have weapons, don't nothing happen to them. Trayvon Martin, you got somebody running up on him, shooting him. Ahmaud Arbery, somebody shoot, and it's just so many cases. These are the only two because the list is so long. I just wanted to give some examples. Y'all see the news. Y'all know what's going on out there. Y'all know that I'm not lying about how blacks are treated. The exact same thing is still going on from slave patrol. The exact same thing. And so when we see blacks being beat up, when we see them being intimidated, harassed, that's them doing their job because that's exactly what they were created for. They were created to terrorize and to instill fear through violence upon blacks. Um, that's what they were created for. Because we always want to ask ourselves, well, why do they do this? I wasn't doing anything. And this is one of the biggest things that you got to realize. And I'm not going to say because I do believe there's a difference between white supremacy and also black hate. Like everybody that's a white supremacy is not necessarily hate black people. Because white supremacy is the idea that you're better, that you're smarter, that you're good, better looking, you're more intelligent, whatever. That's white supremacy. But hate are the ones that want to kill you and want to do actually do harm to you. And we see a lot of that on the police force. And I mean, it's even in FBI reports. FBI has said that white supremacists and like radical white supremacy has organizations has infiltrated the police, and they haven't infiltrated the police. They've always been there. We see where it originated out of. How can we all of a sudden say that's just actually more evidence? The fact that the FBI is saying that the police department is infiltrated with radical white supremacists. But it hasn't just been infiltrated. It began out of that. It started out of that. So how can you infiltrate something that is like the very foundation and the very core of what you are? So basically, by them saying that, they're just shedding light and just making it true that we know that that's what it's about. And this is something that's really scary that I'm gonna tell y'all. The fact that we have hardcore racists or people that don't like people in these uniforms and they have qualified immunity, and you think that you want to comply and you think that you want to do everything that's supposed to be done, and you're going to listen and you're going to yes sir, when their number one motive or objective is to terrorize you, to beat you, to harm you, there's absolutely nothing you can do, nothing you can say, no way you can act to prevent that, because that's what they're coming to do to you from the very start. From the very start, that's the motivation and objective. So people always say, if you comply, then this and it. Not when the person already has made up their mind. I'm coming to do some harm to you. I'm finna mess with this person. So when somebody got their mind made up that that's what they're doing, ain't nothing you can say, ain't nothing you can do at that time. And then what's so crazy is that it's protected. And like I said, and it's not just the police, the entire system. The policing is just only a part of the system, but it takes judges and etc. to cover for those judges and unions and other groups to make sure that these type of activities like killing of blacks and police brutality on blacks is upheld and is acceptable. And I just want y'all to know, actions always speak louder than words. You can say one thing on a piece of paper, but what you do, what they actually doing is something else. And then we can say, well, they not supposed to be doing this. The law says this, the law says that, the law. That's what the law says, but what are they doing? What are they allowed to do? If it's such the law, when it's violated, then there would be repercussions, there would be actions, there would be some type of reprimand taken. And in most cases, when these types of things happen, the police are heroes, and uh, even cases where they've got promoted, paid leave, vacation time, a GoFundMe. So you have to really look at it. So when with the behavior that's supposed to be unlawful or illegal, that gets rewarded. So I'm just saying, actions speak louder than words. That's what they were created to do, and that's what they're doing. So I had said I was going to do this, so I did. I appreciate y'all for watching. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so. Please like the video. Please give me comments. Let me know. Do you think that, can you see the resemblance between the police and slave patrol? Did you know that the slave patrol existed? I mean, did you know that the police were originated out of the slave patrol? So do you get a better understanding of why there's such a disdain between blacks and police? I don't know. Just leave me some comments, friends. Friends, y'all just keep watching out. I'm gonna have some more information coming out on some different topics. I'm also going to be doing another video on my series, Exposing White Lies, True Black History, all about learning a little bit more history about Africa and where we come from, and not this theory and myth that we was all heathens and uncivilized, swinging from trees with bones in our nose and all that type of crap. I would really like for y'all to watch those series if you get a chance. Exposing White Lies, um, True Black History 1 and 2 on the channel. And until next time, friends, thank y'all for watching, and y'all have a good day.